Thank you for joining me today. My name is Caleb McKay. I am the FAFSA Completion Senior Manager for Schoolhouse Connection. I apologize if you hear my dog whining in the background. She's perfectly fine, just a little dramatic. Um, I'm the FAFSA Completion Senior Manager with Schoolhouse Connection. I have been with Schoolhouse since December of 2024. Before that, I have a background in financial aid office. In my last role, I was the single point of contact for my institution for unaccompanied homeless youth. So I was the one taking in documents and making determinations for unaccompanied homeless youth. I'm also joined today by Jillian Sitar, the Director of Higher Education for Schoolhouse Connection. She'll pop in every now and then as we go through today. But today we are going to be talking about ID verification, helping students navigate that process for financial aid. Some general housekeeping. This webinar will be about 45 minutes, so a little bit shorter than our usual programming. Please type your questions into the Q&A box. This helps us keep track of questions a little better so they don't get lost in the chat box. This session will be recorded, and we believe that email will be sent out by Friday this week. And this recording will also be posted on our website and our YouTube channel. So if you're watching from the future, hello from the past. You'll also receive a certificate of attendance as verification that you have attended this session. And we also encourage you to sign up and join our Slack community if you have not already. It's a great place to connect with your peers and connect with us. Reach out to us if you have any questions. For anyone who is not familiar, Schoolhouse Connection is a national nonprofit working to overcome homelessness through early care and education, from prenatal all the way to and through post-secondary education. We do this through technical and strategic advocacy, technical assistance, and in partnership with youth, families, schools, districts, early childhood programs, institutions of higher education, as well as service providers. So if you haven't visited our website, please do. We have a wealth of information, resources, and tools at your disposal. And also sign up to join our newsletter. It's a great way to keep up to date on webinars such as this one and other policy changes and tools. So today, we want to go over the process of applying for financial aid as an unaccompanied homeless youth. Just keep in mind that this will be a little bit more of a high-level review. We won't go too in-depth here. And then we want to spend time talking about ID verification for financial aid purposes. So what are some updates, changes? What does the process look like? As well as go over some resources and, if we have time, some questions. To apply for financial aid as an independent student, there are a few options, one of which is an unaccompanied homeless youth determination. And these definitions are coming from the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. And one key difference between the McKinney-Vento Act for the K-12 system and financial aid in the higher education system is that to qualify as an independent student, the student does have to be unaccompanied. So unaccompanied is defined as not living in the physical custody of a parent or legal guardian. And so there are two options here. A student can either be considered unaccompanied and homeless, where they're lacking a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, or they can be unaccompanied, self-supporting, and at risk of homelessness. So self-supporting is when they pay for all of their own expenses, including their housing. And at risk of homelessness is when their housing may cease to be fixed, regular, and adequate. So we have an overall timeline here for what the process looks like. Typically, the first step will be the student submits the FAFSA as an independent student. They select the answer yes to the question asking if since July 1st they have been either unaccompanied and homeless or unaccompanied, self-supporting, and at risk of homelessness. From there, if the student is a first-time unaccompanied homeless youth applicant, they will need to provide documentation to the financial aid office. And this can come from either a determination from an authorized individual, if that's available. If that is not available, the student can provide either a written statement or conduct a documented interview with the financial aid office to verify their status. Once that is complete, there may be other financial aid requirements the student needs to complete, such as submitting statements, taxes, clarifying household size, as well as verifying their identity, which we will talk about today. So first, we want to hear from you. So those who are working with students, have students reached out to you for help with verification or needing documents to verify their financial aid? So I'll give you a second to answer the poll. All right, looks like a vast majority have answered yes. So many students are reaching out for help with verification. This is good to know. So with verification, we do have some recent updates. The Department of Education in the last few weeks announced a new plan to unveil a system for verifying a student's identity when they submit the FAFSA. So currently, the student submits the FAFSA and then may have to provide a copy of their ID to the financial aid office at a later date. This new plan would have the student verify their ID while submitting the FAFSA, and this is verifying their ID with the Office of Federal Student Aid rather than directly with the financial aid office. However, until that new system is implemented, more students will be selected for verification, which means more students will need to provide a copy of their ID to the financial aid office. In just the summer 2025 alone, it is anticipated or estimated that 125,000 additional students will be selected to verify their ID with financial aid office. So this is an increase, significant increase from previous trends. But in the meantime, the Department of Education has opened up new ways to verify their ID with financial aid office.
So, Caleb, can you just kind of explain it and break it down a little bit more? Like, what is actually ID verification? Like, what is it?
Great question, Jillian. The word verification can be used kind of as an umbrella term for any requirement student needs to resolve after they submit the FAFSA, but it's also used to describe this specific process of verifying their ID or tax status. And so a student can be selected either by the Department of Education when they submit the FAFSA or by the financial aid office at a later date. If a student is selected, they must verify their identity with financial aid office before they can receive financial aid. And students can be selected for multiple years. So let's say a student is a current college student during the 24-25 school year, and they were selected for verification. They provided their ID, everything was cleared, and they've got their financial aid. They can be selected for the next year, the 25-26 school year. And if that's the case, they will need to verify their identity again. And so every time a student is selected for each given school year, they will need to verify their ID. And so that just means providing a copy of a valid, non-expired, government-issued photo ID to the financial aid office.
And so, we've helped students in the past fill out the FAFSA. Why is this verification thing, ID verification happening? Like, why is it necessary? Why are we doing it?
We have seen, and by we, I mean higher education and across many industries as well, have seen significant increases in fraud attempts in the most recent years. So this is when someone is posing as a student or posing as someone else, taking financial aid out in their name, receiving all of the refunds, taking loans out in someone else's name, and then that person is left with identity fraud, the person whose name was being used. So schools are required to ensure that financial aid funds are not dispersed fraudulently. In other words, that they are giving financial aid, federal financial aid from the Department of Education to people who are who they say they are. So when a financial aid office verifies a student's identity, that's what they're confirming. They're just confirming that you are who you say you are the student, and then can move forward with financial aid eligibility. And this is in place to help prevent against identity fraud for the students or people whose names are being used, as well as protecting the institution and preventing from financial aid from being delivered fraudulently.
Okay, that makes sense. And so, we work with unaccompanied homeless youth. They need to provide determination stating that these students are an unaccompanied homeless youth. So, since we're providing that determination, do unaccompanied homeless youth still need to go undergo ID verification as well?
The answer is yes. So those are two separate processes. So just because a student has provided documents for determination of unaccompanied homeless youth or unaccompanied self-supporting and at risk of homelessness, they may still be selected for verification and need to provide a copy of their identity, a copy of their ID to the financial aid office. So these are separate processes, and just because a student has completed their determination does not necessarily mean that all requirements have been resolved. So it's important to follow up with the financial aid office to make sure that nothing else is needed, all of the requirements have been resolved.
Okay, that makes sense. I recognize that these are two separate processes, but this might have kind of like an impact for many of our students. Oftentimes, students might not be able to provide an ID. So, can you talk a little bit more about that? What the impact will be for our unaccompanied homeless youth?
Yeah, as we know, many youth experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity face barriers in accessing and applying for IDs, whether it is the transportation to go to the places necessary to apply or pick up IDs, or even having a permanent mailing address to put on those applications. The impact goes beyond just having access to those IDs because that ID has to be verified before they can receive financial aid. This can result in delays in that student receiving financial aid, which can be the difference in whether that student is able to stay enrolled in their classes or even finish their degree or their credential that they're working on uh, to pursue their higher education credential. Schoolhouse Connection put out a survey during the 25-26 FAFSA cycle, and we found that 40% of respondents shared that accessing documents like a social security number or card, ID, taxes, birth certificates were one of the top challenges for completing the FAFSA for youth experiencing homelessness. So this does impact youth experiencing homelessness in a more significant rate than students who are not experiencing homelessness.
And so, what do our students need to know to prepare for the FAFSA, to prepare for potentially being asked to undergo ID verification?
If you are working with a student who is experiencing homelessness and they have been selected for ID verification, it's important to let them know that they must present a valid, non-expired, government-issued photo ID. Some common examples might be a driver's license, a state ID, a US passport, among others. If they are selected, they must verify their ID before they can receive financial aid. So it's important to make sure that this process is gets taken care of sooner rather than later to ensure that there are not delays in receiving their financial aid. If their financial aid has already been dispersed and they are selected for verification at a later date, essentially that financial aid will be pulled back in what's called an overpayment, and that will result in a balance owed by the student until that verification is resolved. So if a student is selected for verification, it's important to make sure that gets taken care of as soon as is practicable. We do have a few resources that we'll talk about a little more in depth in a few minutes, but one is the I Am Here Vital Document Legal Hotline for Youth by the National Network for Youth. So this is a hotline for youth experiencing homelessness to get help and legal advice on applying for and accessing vital documents like IDs, like birth certificates, social security cards. And Schoolhouse Connection also has a resource page on our website going all over verification and some resources to get that taken care of.
Right. And just a reminder, if you have questions, I see some trickling in, please put it in the Q&A so we can see all of those at the end of our webinar. So for clarification, Caleb, again, it's a valid, non-expired, government-issued photo ID. How can students then get an ID? We know it can be challenging and tricky, so how can they do it? Or provide their
So
ID?
once a student has an ID, there are a few options in which they can present that ID to a financial aid office. The first is in person with an authorized individual at the school. This will usually be a financial aid administrator, but some colleges and universities may also have trained and authorized welcome desk staff or other individuals at the college. So this is in person. You would present the ID to the individual. They would then make a copy, annotate as necessary, and then keep that copy for their records. Another option, if you are not able to appear in person, is if a student, again, is not able to appear in person, they can meet with a notary who would then verify their identity and present paperwork for that verification. And the student would then mail in through postal mail a copy of that paperwork, as well as a copy of that ID that the notary confirmed. So those two are not new options. Those have been and will continue to be options for students to present their ID. A new option presented by the financial aid, presented by the Department of Education is a video call. So if a student is not able to appear in person, the school can choose to host a video call with the student in which the student presents their ID to the camera. It has to be legible enough for the person on the other end to be able to read that ID and verify that the ID matches with that student. And then the school has a choice to either take a screenshot of the ID through that video call, or after they've verified the ID, have the student mail in a copy of that ID. I will note here that not every school is using the video call option for a number of reasons, from technical abilities, capabilities to believe some states have state-specific laws requiring public institutions to not maintain biometric data, so they may not be able to take that screenshot. So contact your school's financial aid office to see what options are available. And if they are using the video call option, encourage that for students who may have difficulty with travel and appearing in person at the financial aid office. And another option that I won't spend too much time on just because it is very uncommon is a vendor. So a student can verify their ID with a vendor that is compliant with the NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology ID Assurance Level 2. If you have questions about this vendor option, more information can be found on the Department of Education Federal Student Aid's website. So we want to hear from you again. So this time in the chat, we want to hear what anticipated barriers you expect students to face with verification. So with applying for their IDs, presenting their IDs to the financial aid office, the whole process, what barriers and challenges do you expect students to face? I'll give you a few seconds to put your thoughts in the chat.
And Caleb, as we're getting some questions or some responses in the chats, maybe we can answer a question that I'm seeing a lot in the Q&A. People are asking, would a school issued photo ID be sufficient?
A school-issued photo ID, unfortunately, is not sufficient. So it does have to be government issued, as well as non-expired, valid, and must have their photo ID. So a social security card would also not work in this case, as well as birth certificate. There has to be a non-expired, government-issued photo ID. That is a great question. All right, so continue putting your thoughts into the chat. We're just going to go ahead and move forward here. We want to go over some resources. So as I mentioned, Schoolhouse Connection has a new webpage all about this, and bear with me as I change screens here. So if you Google Schoolhouse Connection ID verification, this should be one of the first results that you see. But this covers a lot of what we are talking about today. Covers what ID verification is and the department's announcement about the new system for verifying identity, as well as steps to take if a student is selected for ID verification. And again, if a student is selected for verification after their financial aid has already paid, without going too far into the weeds here, this would essentially create a balance owed for the student. So if financial aid pays out, their tuition is resolved, zero balance owed, and then they are selected for ID verification, the financial aid that had already paid out would essentially be pulled back, and this is called an overpayment because at that time, until that requirement is resolved, the student is considered ineligible for financial aid. So that would create a balance owed, and essentially the student would have to pay back the financial aid that was dispersed. Once that requirement is resolved, the student presents their ID to the financial aid office. The requirement is cleared by that financial aid office. The financial aid that had dispersed should be redispersed back into the account. So everything should kind of zero back out again. But we want to make sure that gets taken care of sooner rather than later so that if a balance is owed after a certain amount of time, the school may have that balance sent to collections or have late payment fees added to the balance. So we want to make sure that that requirement is taken care of sooner rather than later, and that communication is open between the student and the financial aid office. And we recognize that each state has their own application and process, and some states may have fee waivers for youth experiencing homelessness to apply for IDs. So we have a list of each state's website where more information can be found on applying for state IDs. And we also link to the National Network for Youth and their hotline. So to go over this as well, this is a new tool from the National Network for Youth. A student can call this 1-888-870-3627 or 1-888-870-DOCS, and they can receive real-time state-specific legal assistance to help apply for vital documents. So this includes IDs, this includes driver's license, state IDs, birth certificates, and more. And this is a free service. And if the student calls outside of the hours in which they are operating, they should be prompted to leave a voicemail, and someone from that hotline will call them back and make sure that they're connected. So hours are 12 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern, and they adjust based on time zone. So 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Pacific. This page also has frequently asked questions about what happens when a student or individual calls, why vital documents may be important for students, and just a little bit more information. And if you want to share this resource with your networks or with youth you are working with, they have some graphics and toolkits that you can use to spread the word and share these resources. So I'm going to go back to our slides here. And again, these slides will be sent out to everyone who registered within the next couple of days. You have access to these resources, all of these links, as well as resources here on this page. Schoolhouse Connection also has a few upcoming webinars. On August 27th, we are going to go, excuse me, we are going to go over FAFSA and homeless youth scenarios and solutions. So we've taken suggestions and we're continuing to take suggestions of real scenarios that you are experiencing in the field, some tricky examples of whether or not a student qualifies as an unaccompanied homeless youth. And then we will go over those scenarios in this webinar. And then later in September, on the 30th, we have a webinar on expanding college access with the Common App. So this will be a great resource to learn more about the Common App and how that can increase access for students pursuing a higher education. All right, I'm going to take a break here. And Jillian, are there any questions that you've been seeing in the Q&A or in the chat that would be good to address here?
Yeah, definitely. So just again, want to state this is a non-expired, valid government issued photo ID. So unfortunately, no school IDs. It does not need to be a real ID. So that clarification, it does not need to be a real ID. It just needs to be a state issued, government issued ID. We have a question from Becca saying, we keep saying if selected, does the ID verification process not apply to all students? Can you clarify that?
Yes, that is a great question. As of today, not all students are selected for verification. So sometimes a student is selected if there is either conflicting information or something that financial aid office would like to clarify. And sometimes students are selected randomly just as a preventative measure to make sure that fraud is being addressed. So just because a student has been selected for this verification does not necessarily mean anyone is suspicious of that student or that student or parent has done anything necessarily wrong or incorrect. They could have just been one of the lucky random selections. So yes, great question. Not every student is selected, but we are seeing an increase this summer and likely forward into the fall in the number of students who are being selected.
Great. And we're really prioritizing questions related to ID verification. I know we're getting a lot of other questions that are popping up about the FAFSA. I suggest that you sign up for our other webinars, but for the purpose of this time, we're really going to focus on identity verification. We have another question here saying, am I understanding correctly that at some point, Department of Ed will take on identity verification in-house and it's not going to happen through the college?
That is a great question, and a lot of this information is new and is changing. So if you are watching this recording at a later date, just be aware that things may have changed since today, August 6th, 2025. But the information that we have as of today is that the intent is to bring the administrative burden away from the colleges to the Department of Education so that they will handle this ID verification, which will result in a lower amount of students selected for ID verification with the financial aid office. So to answer your question, it won't completely, as at least as of my understanding, it won't completely remove the verification process with financial aid office directly or with the college directly, but it will largely move the responsibility to Department of Education. So they will take on more of that process, but you may still see it on the individual college level.
Thank you, Caleb. We know things are changing all the time. So as of right now, that is what we are expecting. We have a question here from Melanie. Can you just talk a little bit more about being responsible for the overpayment during the verification process? And if you want to pull up those slides again, that might be helpful to see it in writing. But just again, who the responsible for overpayment during verification?
Yes, that is a Good question here. So the the technical process is a bit more on the back end, but if once financial aid pays out, if the student becomes ineligible for financial aid, and that might be if a new requirement has been added to the account, that means the student is technically at that time considered ineligible until that requirement is resolved. So if a student has been paid financial aid and then for one reason or another are considered ineligible, that financial aid, they would not have been eligible for that financial aid as of that time. So the financial aid would be pulled back. So if you think of a ledger, let's say tuition was $1,000 and they have a $1,500 grant or loan. That pays out, that pays their balance, and they receive a $500 refund, just for simple math here. And then they're selected for verification. That quote unquote overpayment means that at the time they're ineligible, they're not eligible for that $1,500 grant or loan that paid out. So then the student must repay that $1,500 back to the school, who repays that to the Department of Education. But once that requirement is resolved, that financial aid can be paid back into that account. So it's a little bit of kind of back and forth and up and down, but the main takeaway is that if they're selected for verification after their financial aid has dispersed, that would most likely result in a balance owed for the student until that requirement is taken care of.
Great. And you might know the answer to this, you might not, but Rosalind wants to know, how long does it take for a verification to be cleared after presenting everything to the financial aid office?
The answer to that really depends on the individual financial aid office, and what their administrative capability is. If they are fully staffed and operating at full steam, then it might be a little bit faster, could take a couple of days. They do have to, again, kind of on the back end, make some corrections that have to process through a system or database. So even if they process it that day, it may take a few days before those changes are fully processed by the systems that they're using. Um, but also understand that many financial aid offices are often understaffed and have a high turnover, so they may be training staff even if they have the full staff that they need in that office. So the answer really depends on the financial aid office and what their processes look like.
Thank you. And just to give you an opportunity to catch your breath, Caleb, I just want to state, we recognize that so many of our students might not have an ID, especially for our students who are in high school. I've been seeing a lot of questions about of not being able to have addresses and maybe not being able to get the vital documents. And we recognize that it's a different scenario than maybe in the past. And so we are just wanting to share this information with you all because there might be an increase of students reaching out for help. So while we do have the National Network for Youth, the vital documents number, the legal hotline for right now, we are hoping and anticipating that more resources will be available. And every state kind of has different laws related to being able to support students experiencing homelessness with being able to provide certain pieces in order to get the IDs. But we are hoping that there will be more resources as the rollout continues. I wanted to ask a question here and I lost it let me see if I can find it again. Okay, here. Victoria has this really great question, Caleb. What do we do if a student suspects that their name and social security number is being used fraudulently on the FSA website? What should they do? They've had a student who tried to make an FSA ID, but they were unable to due to an account. It was already made under another social security number. So what do we do there?
That is a great question. That does happen, unfortunately. In that case, I would recommend the student start with calling the Federal Student Aid's hotline number, which, if memory serves, I think is 1-888-433-3243. Um, Double check those numbers before you reference that to someone. But uh, I would start there and let them know that you or the student are trying to create an account and it looks like one has already been made by someone else. They should be able to advise on next steps and the proper places to report that incident. You may also contact the school's financial aid office just to let them know of what's going on so that they're aware that if maybe they've received or another college has received a FAFSA from that fraudulent account, that the necessary steps in reporting can happen, that they can report that to the Office of Inspector General with Federal Student Aid. But I would start with the Federal Student Aid's hotline and then follow their steps and their advice there.
And I think I know the answer to this. It might be a little funky. And so we'll get through this question together from Elizabeth. If a student doesn't verify their identity when completing the FAFSA, will they still be able to submit the application? Or is identity verification required before submission?
I'm assuming this is in reference to the new system that the Department of Education is planning to implement. And uh, unfortunately, I don't have a concrete answer at this time. My hope is that a student can still submit the FAFSA and would just need to verify their ID at a later date, but we don't have confirmation on that as of now. So that's still up in the air.
All right. And do we know, and we might not know, if other alternative state applications are requiring the same ID verification? So for example, California has the CADA, Texas has their own state application. Do we know anything at this point in time if they are requiring the same ID verification for state aid?
I would assume that if your state has an alternative state application, that the process after they've submitted the form is essentially the same. So they may still have to verify their identity, provide copy of taxes, any of those other requirements, that would all still be the same. So for the most part, those state alternative applications are designed to mirror the process of the FAFSA. Mirror the process of the FAFSA, except for a few exclusions, such as the citizenship questions for students and parents. So the short answer is yes, the student may still have to verify their identity, even if they're submitting an alternative application.
All right. And so, Caleb, let's run through the resources one last time and our contact information. I just want to say that thank you everyone for joining us. There's a lot of questions that are coming in, and we want to make sure that you all receive a copy of this recording and this PowerPoint. And I think if Caleb, if you want to put up oh, perfect. There we go. Resource upcoming webinars. I know people have a lot of questions about the FAFSA. And so on August 27th at 2 p.m. Eastern, we are going to be going through common scenarios of, does the student meet this definition of an unaccompanied homeless youth or unaccompanied youth at risk of homelessness and self-supporting, or do they need to be an independent student from another different reason, maybe a dependency override, maybe they're a former foster youth. So we're going to go through some common scenarios. In November, we are going to be doing a more dedicated FAFSA webinar where we go through filling out or outlining the process for an unaccompanied homeless youth, filling out the FAFSA, talking about the provisions from FAFSA Simplification Act, and really get into more of the weeds. So that will be in November. We wanted to wait until after the FAFSA is out and available in October to see if there's any bugs or hiccups or anything. So that's why it's going to be a little bit later in the fall. All right, I'll turn it back to you, Caleb, to close us out.
All right. Definitely follow us on social media. We are on LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, and you'll find a recording of this video posted to our YouTube channel, as well as Facebook, Blue Sky, and X. Also join our Slack community if you have not already. It's a great way to connect with your peers along with Schoolhouse Connection team members. If you have any questions about financial aid verification, FAFSA, anything like that, please contact me. My email is caleb@schoolhouseconnection.org. You're also welcome to contact Jillian at Thank you so much for joining us today. We are happy to answer any questions you have. Send us an email. We also have a contact form on our website. We can direct you to the right person to answer your questions. But with that, I think I will close it out in a few seconds here. But thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you all.